evening, everyone, and welcome to the fourth in our InFocus series of talks, jointly hosted by the Rotary Foundation and by the Humanitarian Services team in Great Britain and Ireland. We're delighted to have along tonight a speaker to cover the area of focus of peace building and conflict resolution. And I'm going to hand over to Jannine Burtwhistle, our specialist in that area, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you very much, Jannine.
Thanks ever so much, John. Evening, everybody. Absolutely delighted to welcome our speaker this evening, who is a Rotary Peace Fellow, Derran Moss-Dalmau, from the very first class of Rotary Peace Fellows back in 2002. Derran's career has been devoted to helping others, and he has vast experience in some of the most complex and challenging humanitarian crises. Since 2016, he's worked at the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and his personal focus has been on Myanmar and Bangladesh. He's passionate about the importance of the Rotary Peace Centres and the role that all Rotarians and the whole family of Rotary play in making our world a more peaceful place, starting at home in our communities. Derran, over to you, please.
Thanks very much, Jannine, and everybody else, Phil, John, Garth, Bill, and everybody else who's on screen. And I'm assuming there's people on screen. I can't see anybody other than myself. But I really do wish you all, my sincerest thanks for joining and your patience in, listening to me, hopefully give some insights into what's been happening in the world of peace and conflict resolution and humanitarian response. And really, I do want to say a thanks to each and every one of you, Rotary friends, friends of Rotary, because I think Rotarians are the ones that go above and beyond at every turn. The selfless view at what they do, workers, not the shirkers. You're out there, you're among us here today, you're here this afternoon. They're probably sitting beside you if they're not you. And if they are beside you, then you should be beside yourself because you're magnificent and, give yourself a hand. You don't have a leg to stand on. I did want to say, look, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and good night, wherever you may be in the world. And by way of a very quick disclaimer, just to say that the views expressed today are my own, they're not those of the UN, though hopefully I think that some of them may coalesce. And secondly, just by way of brief background and to build on what Jannine said, I guess just to introduce myself, I graduated from law school in '98 and from the University of North Carolina as a Rotary World Peace Fellow in 2004. Along the way, I've worked in the courts, I've worked in counterterrorism and in anti-corruption. I've worked as a lawyer, as a political advisor, and as a humanitarian. I was a teacher for 4 years. I worked in Afghanistan for nearly 2 years, and I was arrested in the Ukraine once. In that time, I think I've probably learned at least 3 things: that kids are honest, devious, and hilarious. Secondly, that I have a genetic inability to grow convincing sideburns. And thirdly, that the Ukrainian police have absolutely no sense of humor whatsoever about their hats. I worked in East as a legal advisor for the Timorese police, where the official mascot was literally a crocodile outside my office. And I worked in the far north of Afghanistan, providing political advice to local officials and moonlighting warlords in much the same way I think that a jack.
Sorry about that, folks. We seem to have lost Derran for a few minutes, but hopefully he'll be able to find his way back in a few seconds. One of the things that we wanted to say to you at the end, but we'll now do it now, is that as a Rotary Peace Fellow, you will hear how passionate Derran is about the Rotary Peace Programme. And here in Great Britain and Ireland, what we will be doing over the course of the months ahead, and this is something that is an ongoing thing and can be done annually, is we will be encouraging you to use the Rotary Peace Fellowship application process, the seeking of applicants, as a way to engage with your community. I'll carry on with that after because it looks as if Derran's back with us. Over to you again, Derran. Hopefully you are stable.
Sorry, colleagues. Sorry, everybody. The internet has dropped out, but we are back and I've got a redundancy in place in case that happens again. Sorry, I think as I was saying, I did have the great honour to be amongst the first class of Rotary World Peace Fellows. And it was an extraordinary program that did bring UNC and G together academically, which was as much of a surprise for them as for everybody else. I do have to apologise in advance, because it's possible that I'm really going to depress you early or late in the afternoon on a Thursday. I know it's a Thursday afternoon, I know it's the festive season, and I know that no one really tunes into an event at 5 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon to be bummed out. But the reality is, I don't have a ton of happy stories to tell, but that doesn't mean that I don't have an uplifting message, hopefully, to bring. So I confess that I'm planning to probably depress you a little bit at the beginning, and then hopefully reel everybody back in and end on a note of hope, or at least, if not hope, then cautious optimism. As noted, I've spent the last decade of my life working probably on two issues. One was peace in Afghanistan, and the other was peace in Myanmar. Was peace in Myanmar. And suffice to say, out of that, 2021 has probably not been a great year. So I'm 2 from 2 in terms of fiascos. That's not to say that before that it's been a conga line of successes and jubilations, but after years of watching democratic reform slowly creep into place in Myanmar and then be snuffed out by a coup in February, and then seeing decades of incremental success and failure in Afghanistan be reduced to a footnote with the swift capitulation of the Afghan forces to the Taliban, this year, has been difficult. But I think we need to be honest about these things. We need to understand what the reality is, and we need to understand that these are really challenging times. Not only, I think, if I've been following the news correctly, are they challenging times because possibly, nearly, maybe, definitely there was a party at number 10 Downing Street a year ago, and we should be worried about that. But we continue to wrestle with the global pandemic. Military spending has increased, global peace has decreased, displacement has grown, and aid spending in many countries has dropped. From my country, home country Australia, or where many of you are from in the UK, both of those countries reduced aid expenditure by 10% last year, even though globally aid increased actually by about 3.5%. What we do know is that going into 2022, needs are rising. So 247 million people across the world, which is a sad record, will need humanitarian, life-saving humanitarian assistance and protection. If all those people were combined together as a single country, that would be the 4th largest country in the world. And displacement within that group is at an all-time high. 82.4 million people across the globe are being displaced from their homes, which, again, if that was a single country, would be the 20th largest country in the world, just under Germany. And there's 26 million refugees, and more than 48 million people are internally displaced. And of those people who are displaced, 40% of them or more than half of refugees, I should say, are children under the age of 18, and 40% of the internally displaced people are children under the age of 18. And so it doesn't take much to understand what a generational impact that has upon millions of children. And again, within that group, 45 million people in 43 countries are on the edge of famine as we speak today. And in most of these crises, women and girls are the ones that bear the brunt of pre-existing gender inequalities and protection risks that are all heightened during this pandemic, as well as during the other crises that are ongoing. And one statistic that I find particularly concerning is that for every 3 months of lockdown that we've seen over the last 2 years, we see an increase of 15 million incidents of gender-based violence. And that raises, deeply troubling concerns about how we, as a community, as a society, however we define that, either narrowly or broadly, can deal with the new reality that we have to live in. Looking at all those people in need, the resource requirements are increasing to a level that we haven't seen before. So in order to provide life-saving assistance to just 183 million of those people who are acutely in need, the request at the moment is $41 billion. So in effect, the 4th largest nation on earth is asking for an operating budget for just the minimal life-saving assistance, not any bells and whistles, but just minimal life-saving assistance of about the same size as the 92nd sized global economy. So there is a clear disparity between the number of people and the ask just to meet basic needs. To put, I guess, that 41 billion, I should say, billion with a B, in context, America has spent about the same amount of money last year on pet food. The US defense budget is $686 billion, and global military expenditure is $2 trillion. So crunching those numbers, and I'd like to say I'm doing this very quickly off the top of my head, but I confess that I did it a little earlier. That's about $253 per person that's spent every year on military expenditure, and about $5.20 that's spent per person globally, or requested per person globally on aid expenditure. And this is the new normal, and it's terrifying. And it appears that there are more conflicts, more people in need, things are growing more difficult, more dangerous operating environments, more complex operating environments, and more interlinked challenges. Climate change, pandemics, natural disaster, terrorism. These are all challenges that no one nation can actually address alone. This requires community response. Community as we see it within our villages, within our towns, within our homes, communities we see it within our country, communities we see it within our region, communities we see it globally, a community of people that must respond to interlinked challenges that question, you know, in some cases an existential threat to ourselves and certainly to future generations. So that being a really incredibly depressing introduction about the sort of general state of the world as it is, it does beg the question, you know, at least in some part, what has my role been in any of this and my experience in any of this, and what have I learnt out of any of this? As noted, I spent a significant amount of time, or have spent a significant amount of time working on both Afghanistan and Myanmar, and have certainly worked for a number of years in both of those places, or in Afghanistan and about 6 months in Myanmar. And I thought I'd touch just quickly upon my experiences in both, just to give some sense of where we are, or where I am, and what has coloured my view of things. In terms of Afghanistan, I've spent about a year and a half living there. I was living in a tiny little compound in the far north of the country. And in Jalzjan province, there's a little town of Shobagan, and it's flat farming country, Uzbeks and Turkmen predominantly, dead flat, mountains behind you. You could watch your dog run away for a week in front of you across to the border to the north. The two photos there that I think are up on screen are both my first day and last day in country. The first day sort of crossing over the Hindu Kush, heading north in a UN flight, and the last photo was sort of taking the reverse route as I was leaving country in a helicopter piloted by you know, mad Russians who were wonderful pilots. They're old Hind, I think, helicopters that the UN was using that sort of sweep down through the valleys. And that was sort of my first day and last day. Afghanistan is a country of two languages, Dari and Pashto, two unofficial languages, I should say as well, Uzbek and Turkmen, and about 30 other languages that are used in different parts of the country. And I thought, oh, that's lucky. I speak English and Japanese and a smattering of Portuguese profanities. It's a devoutly Muslim country, unsurprisingly, as people know. And I thought, oh, well, that's great as well. I was born a Methodist, raised Uniting, schooled Anglican, married a Catholic, and was once asked by my employer to go to a strip club with an atheist and a Buddhist nun. So I thought, right, I've really prepared for that particular part of the country. And it's a country where politics is really it's a full contact sport, as we've seen. And again, I, you know, delusionally said, look, I'm ready. I said to myself, I've danced in the rough and tumble of Australian politics. This is just a different tune. But I guess if the old saying that the difference between kinky and perverted is the difference between using a feather and using the whole chicken, then I guess Australian politics, even at their most kinky, can barely hold a candle to the full chicken freakout that is Afghan politics in full flight. My job was in the political sphere. I was a political officer. It was my job to know who was doing what, to know why they were doing it, to know what was happening, and to be able to provide advice. And I guess I remember mostly my time there as a series of collected moments. And some of those were very inspiring. It was organizing and working with young leaders on anti-corruption workshops and trying to work with them around what they could do to address corruption in Afghanistan, which was and is a massive problem in terms of the country being able to progress. I remember working on voting drives, particularly focused on women and young female voters, and there being these old teachers, you know, elderly women, 60s, 70s, just carved of oak and fire and passion, who had seen everything and were so committed to their rights and to the rights of the younger women who were just coming up into the, you know, a system that was changing but still had some significant challenges for them. And watching that hope and that passion and that anger burn bright was incredibly inspiring. And there were difficult and confounding moments, you know, supporting encircled provincial governors as the Taliban and ISIS and others were closing in, and trying to provide advice to Taliban, warlord, police chiefs, and you're never quite sure which hat an individual might be wearing, while at the same time standing next to one of their bodyguards, who was a tiny little fellow whose machine gun was about as big as him, and the stock of the gun was covered in Hello Kitty stickers, and the dissonance between all of that was very difficult. Walking into a meeting where my interpreter is saying to me, whispering to me, look, this guy's in the Taliban, but don't worry about it, his tea is excellent, and trying to think, I don't know how to connect the various concepts in that sentence. And walking quickly out of a different meeting where my interpreter was whispering to me, there's a suicide bomber in town and they're looking for a target like you. And I, for some reason, took comfort in the fact that they were just looking for a target like me and not actually and specifically me, though I really don't know why I found that more comforting. And moments of genuine human connection and levity, of camaraderie with a local imam over children and beard length. And I had very little to show at the time, and even now, I guess, on either front. And to him, because we were about the same age, he found that simply hilarious. Or spending weekends drinking endless cups of tea in a friend's brother who was a tailor in his shop on the weekend, watching young men walk that universally fine line between wanting to look cool and tough and, they didn't care about anything in the world, while simultaneously talking to a tailor about wanting to look super fancy because they were going out for a night on the town. And I also remember, moments of deep sadness, of commemorating with colleagues who had lost their lives, or with colleagues about other colleagues who had lost their lives 2 years previously in an attack on a UN compound in Mazar-e-Sharif, consoling a traumatized friend after a convoy was shot up while she was driving on the road, and losing colleagues and friends in a terrorist attack in Kabul just before I left in January of 2004 in a cafe that I'd frequented and most certainly would have otherwise been in, if I'd been in Kabul at the time. And coming to the end of all of that period and questioning, look, what did we achieve, having seen what's happened this year in August? And I still think about that, and I confess that I don't know. But I do know this, that there was positive change, and regardless of the setbacks that we may have seen now, the long view has to be what we view. And that is, and sorry, Phil, I should have said that you can please flick through to some of the other slides as we're going. I missed that part. And just very, I guess just very quickly, and not that this is going to become slide night, but I guess just to give a sense, that's the entirety of the people that I worked with in the top photo in the office, the smallest office in the country, 20 people in a compound that, I got to leave only for meetings and literally to sit in a tailor's shop on the weekend, surrounded by razor wire in an enormously beautiful country with a wonderful people in the bottom left corner there, celebrating Eid with camel. That a local camel had been killed, and I was, able to dine on camel, where apparently the hump is the most delicious part. It was certainly the fattiest part, but a wonderful experience. Phil, if you flick to the next slide there, please. And again, just shots around town and the massive, around Shebogan, a fascinating place. You can buy meat, you can buy bread, not as we would consider it here, or in many other parts of the world, but it was available. And just, I guess, just snapshots of life as it was in the tiny little town that I lived in, and the constant security threat, I guess, exemplified in the bottom right corner there. And I think the next set of photos, or next slide, is of the game of Buzkashi, which is the national sport. Which basically involves a large, various teams of men on horseback, taking either a calf or a goat's carcass and trying to score by picking up that carcass and take it into a scoring circle, while a commentator calls out bets that are being made on the sidelines on the various riders and who will be able to achieve taking the cow's or the calf's carcass into that particular circle. The photo at the bottom being one of the riders wearing what would appear to be a Soviet tank commander's helmet or headwear as a helmet for the game, proving that, demonstrating there is a long history of conflict in Afghanistan, and everything that is old is new again at some point or another, as we are finding out now. And I think the last set of photos of a man who subsequently became the vice president of the country, General Dostum, who was an incredibly, I guess, divisive figure, hugely popular in the part of the country that I was in, but enormously divisive elsewhere in the country in terms of both his role in fighting in the civil war in the country, as well as, he famously said that he didn't trust the Taliban, or he famously said to have said he didn't trust the Taliban because he doesn't trust anybody who doesn't drink and doesn't dance. And I think that was about our only point of commonality in terms of perhaps our world outlooks. But I guess before I was getting onto the slideshow, I was engaged in that there has been positive change. And just to pick out two figures of that seismic change since 2001, is that in 2001, the life expectancy of people in Afghanistan was about 45 and currently sits at about 63. So an 18-year increase in life expectancy is nothing to sniff at and is certainly a significant improvement. And secondly, in 2001, there were probably around 1 million boys who were in school, just boys who were in school and often in madrasas. And, by the end of last year, certainly, there were estimated to be around 8 million boys and girls who were in differing schools across the country. So again, a significant increase and a significant outlook, a promising outlook. But we have to be honest, we collectively as the international community, as far as we had responsibility to the Afghan people and the Afghan government, we failed, and the Afghan government failed. Not forever, but certainly at the moment, we have failed them. And whatever it was that we constructed and we helped to construct, it wasn't fit for purpose, and there's no two ways around that. But what we do know, and what I think I can say with certainty, is that hope does persist, that we have seen change, and that the international community and local communities will continue to advocate for change slowly and incrementally, and our shoulders will be to the wheel, and we will continue. I'll flip very quickly to Myanmar, and I'm conscious of the time. And I worked in Myanmar since 2017, but in 2018 and 2019, I spent about 6 months working in Myanmar and leading coordination of humanitarian efforts there, particularly in Rakhine State in the west of the country. And it was in Rakhine that in 2017, around 750,000 people, the vast majority of them being Rohingya Muslims, were forced to flee their homes by a brutal campaign of violence and rape and murder that has been called by a number of senior officials as ethnic cleansing and possibly genocide. And I guess just to give a sense of the scale of that, in the space of about 3 months, a city the size of Leeds fled Myanmar en masse, crossed a river with whatever possessions they could grab, and set up camp, in what was once a forested, now muddy hillside in an elephant reserve in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. And when you add in the host communities that were already there and refugees who fled subsequently over following months, it's now a city about 1/3 larger, or a community that is 1/3 larger in size than Birmingham, which is the second largest city in the UK, of about 1.3 million people, over more than half of whom are children. And it's a population that every day requires 400 tons of food, requires 16 million litres of clean drinking water, which is about 6.5 Olympic swimming pools of drinking water per day. It requires 50,000 latrines to just be emptied, which is about 420,000 kilograms of solid waste per day, which is about 715 Morris miners per day of waste simply needs to be moved. And there's protection risks, and protection services are needed for 140,000 single mothers, 200,000 children at risk, and there's 6,000 kids who simply don't have parents who have been unaccompanied that need to be cared for, as well as educational opportunities for more than 500,000 children, and obstetric services for 50,000 women. So all of that, setting up services for a city, 1/3 larger than Birmingham, and responding to that is a massively difficult, near impossible task. But that's the task, I think, that the UN in Bangladesh, and then the UN responding with humanitarian partners around the world in Myanmar, has set for itself. And I guess I use those examples of the challenges in Afghanistan, the challenges in Myanmar, the challenges that I have seen, because it's easy to forget exactly the kind of challenge that I think we collectively are trying to overcome. Rotary has engaged in programs like the Rotary World Peace Fellowship program, and like the everyday programs that you see at every Rotary event that I've ever been to, of the individual stalls, the individual efforts, the individual community and club and district programs and initiatives that are being undertaken, as all parts of that battle to fight this, the vital work of looking at peace. And it's immensely difficult. It's fiendishly frustrating. And it is curing a form of cancer that permeates the soul, twists the good into the horrific, and corrupts and corrodes our real ability of what is ourself and what is humanity. And it's ugly, and we can't fight it with regular weapons. We can spend as much as we want on the military, and it's not going to make a jot of difference to any of this. It can only be challenged, it can be communicated with, it can be engaged with, and it can be cajoled. My experience in Myanmar and Afghanistan, and in the hushed and hallowed hallways of the UN here in New York, is that the only investment we can make that will succeed, that is likely to succeed, is investing in people. Is investing in knowledge, arming people with empathy, with humility, with commitment, and with courage. And I think that's why education and the Rotary World Peace Fellowship program and the individual community programs are the only things that will succeed, because we are at that hinge point in history. We're at this hinge point where the gap between the haves and the have-nots, as we see it, between a polarized political environment, is growing day by day. And we're not going to bridge that gap between those people who have more and those people who have less, unless we can actually tether together our common humanity and tether together our communities. And Rotary's done this before, commitment, belief, passion, vision. Rotary all but eradicated polio, raised $1.5 billion, assisted in raising an additional $9 billion, and immunized 2.5 billion children around the world in 122 countries. I mean, eradicating polio was impossible, and Rotary did it by both local and international initiatives. And peace, I think, really is the next target. And the message I take away from all of the work that I have done is that we're not going to actually address any of these things if we want to become smaller, and if we're scared and we have less funding, if we're afraid of foreigners, if we're afraid of migrants and refugees, if we want to marginalize people that are different, whose skin is different, sexuality is different, faith is different, who fail to fit into what our particular worldview might be. And if we embrace this nationalistic, jingoistic rhetoric and a viewpoint of the world that seeks to exclude rather than embrace, which is all happening on our collective watch at the moment, as we watch, what had been happening in American politics over the last 4 years, what's happening in elements of the UK, and certainly what's happening in different parts of Europe and other parts of the world. Our lives don't become better if we make them smaller and we look after ourselves. Our lives don't become safer just because we want to feel stronger. Our lives, we don't become richer just because we're striving to have more money. And our collective ambition has to be more than being smaller and stronger and richer. It has to be to enrich our communities, our country, and our civilization, rather than doom us to isolation and ashes and sadness. And I've sat with these Afghan affiliates, these victims of abuse, with diplomats, with politicians, with people who've lost everything, lost everyone. And the message that always rings clearest in my mind, that uniformly all of these people, have at the core of what their concern is be more humane, be more open, be more tolerant, be more principled. Don't sit on the sidelines when you should be standing in center court. Don't be told that the other, the alien, the foreign, the different, the lame, the leftist, the losers, the tired, the poor, the weak, all of these people are somehow not as good, not as worthy, and not as important as you are. And we collectively forget that message often. Be left-wing, be right-wing, but don't forget that both wings are attached to the same bird. And if you chop the other one off, you're just going to spin in circles. So my two messages in terms of where to next, and then I'll finish because I'm really conscious of time. There are two messages out of all of that in terms of what can we do, what can you do, what can we do is, we can't necessarily deal with these problems that are millions of miles away, but we can address them in our own communities. And that is engage with the communities on your doorstep. Have the big programs, but engage with the British Rohingya community, engage with Afghan refugees. I think one of the biggest mistakes that the international community and aid and development work made for a long time in terms of building peace and building sustainable communities is telling people what they need and taking up space in the room for the people that needed it, and not going to them and talking about and asking, what's the gap? To purloin a phrase from the tube, don't mind the gap, but find the gap. What is the gap? What do people need today? What do they need in their communities here? What do they need in communities over there? And how can we assist? How can we actually, engage with them in an honest, open, and passionate way? Have a point of view, respect that somebody else has a different point of view, but engage with those communities and find out how we can assist and do what we need to do. And the second one is, I guess, a broader one, but is hold people to account. you see a lot of people being excused, particularly on, in social media and in the media, for, quote unquote, casual racism, for passing indifference, for not being concerned for fellow people. And we need to hold people to account collectively. These are choices we need to combat, and staying silent is a choice, and we can't make that choice collectively any longer. We don't need to be belligerent about it. We don't need to lecture people about it, but we need to be persistent, and we need to be open, and we need to face those incredibly difficult conversations with an incredibly open mind. We have 274 million neighbours and brothers and sisters around the world that need our assistance, and we can't shy away from that in fear. We can't be obsessed with the little differences that divide us, rather than embracing the multitudes of shared experiences that should bring us together. And I think that the Rotary World Peace Fellowship Program and the Alumni Association and all of the Peace Fellows around the world are the parts of the Rotary whole that is trying to bring those communities together as one. And I'll end very quickly, as I have, by stealing an Emo Phillips story, and certainly my apologies if you've heard it before. And it is about a man walking across a bridge and coming across somebody who was about to jump off. And the fellow ran across and he said, "Stop, don't jump." And the other fellow said, well, why shouldn't I? And he said, "Well, you've got so much to live for." He said, "Well, like what?" And he said, "Well, are you religious or atheist?" He said, "Religious." The man said, "Well, me too. Are you Christian or you're Buddhist?" The man said, "Christian." And he said, "Well, me too. Are you Catholic or are you Buddhist? Catholic or Protestant?" He said, "Protestant." He said, "Me too. Are you Episcopalian or Baptist?" He said, "Baptist." He said, "Me too. Look, are you Baptist Church of God or are you Baptist Church of the Lord?" And the man said, "Well, I'm Baptist Church of God." He said, "Me too. Are you Original Baptist Church of God or are you Reformed Baptist Church of God?" He said, "Reformed Baptist Church of God." He said, "Me too." He said, "Are you Reformed Baptist Church of God Reformation of 1879? Are you Reformed Baptist Church of God Reformation of 1915? And the man said, "Reformed Baptist Church of God Reformation of 1915. And the fellow said, "Die, heretic scum," and he pushed him off. I commend everybody for turning up today, and I really am honoured to have been able to speak to everybody. And I hope that we can bring people together in the commonality of what we share, rather than the very few differences that we don't. Peace is a seemingly impossible goal to strive for, and I hope that we collectively can continue to work for that. And I'm happy to talk more specifically about my experiences. I'm hopeful that we can, inherit for our children a world, and our children's children, where our failures and our successes have been magnified, and our successes are the ones that win out. And I sincerely hope that Rotary will continue to be the true believers in this regard, and embrace the heretic scum to our collective bosom, and all of those who are in between. So thanks very much, and happy to chat further to all and sundry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Derren. That's absolutely amazing to hear what a Rotary Peace Fellow has been doing, both before their fellowship and after, and the importance of education. And if any of you have got any doubt about investing in the Rotary Peace Centre programme, then I'm sure that's been wiped out. And if anybody's interested, I know John would be very keen to hear from anyone who wants to make any sort of donations, but that's not what tonight's about. Derren, we've had a number of questions in advance, and you talked about a Rotarian and action that we can take in our local communities. And Gordon Robinson from the Channel Rotary Club in Folkestone has asked, would our focus be best on conflict resolution in the UK society and Ireland, or should we use our networks to support overseas areas of conflict?
I think it's a great question, and at the risk of giving the pat an easy answer, I think that we can do both. I think that you can do both. I think that the two are so inherently interlinked that engaging with local communities, affected by conflict, who are in the UK or wherever Rotary clubs may be, is critical, because these are the communities that can feed then directly back into conflict-affected areas and support conflict resolution. I think that engaging with local politicians, look, all politics is local. Change doesn't happen because Boris Johnson or any other world leader wake up necessarily in the morning with a great idea. It comes because there is a constituency there of people who want to see change, who advocate for change locally. Their local members are advocating at a national level, and then change happens. So engaging with local politicians, to make decisions around conflict, around issues that affect conflict both locally and overseas, I think is critical. And I have to say, engaging with local businesses, and I don't mean sort of, necessarily, local mum and pop shops, but, local corporations, and I'd say local, I mean corporations that are active locally, about their role in some of these conflict affected places. And this is a tricky issue, but, Chevron, Carlsberg, Coca-Cola, Tiger, Kirin, Unilever, British American Tobacco, these are all companies that are deeply invested, for example, in Myanmar, and their work directly feeds the Myanmar military. There are real questions to be asked about how they use their economic influence in those countries, in places like Myanmar. And it's not just Myanmar, it's many other conflict areas of the world. How can we engage with those conflict? How do we make choices as consumers to look at those various products and those various services in our local communities, and how that affects what they're doing overseas? So I think that ultimately, look, it's a great question. Would our focus be better on, the UK Society and Conflict Resolution in the UK or overseas? I actually think Rotary has demonstrated, and Polly and other things are good examples, that it is an organisation adept at doing both, and utilising the different levers of power that you have at your disposal.
Thanks very much, Derren. I am mindful we've got lots of questions, so I think we need to try and keep the answers a little shorter, if that's okay. As much as we'd love to be here for the next 2 hours, I certainly would, and I know many of the audience would as well. Following on from that, we've actually got somebody, Sasha Elena, who I don't think is actually in Rotary, but she's interested to hear about, practical steps that we could perhaps be taking here in the UK in our local communities. And that also follows in with a question from Brigitte Faubert from Hounslow about, many Rotarians think about conflict as being something for somebody else. We're not at war here in Great Britain and Ireland, but really, what's that first step that we can take in Rotary to engage with our communities and help with peace building?
I think that, and I think I touched on this before, and I'll keep the answer short, and that is find the conflict, find the diaspora, find the conflict affected communities, those that are, the UK is a wonderful, multicultural society, and there are communities, a Rohingya community, an Afghan community, Ethiopian Tigray. These communities exist around the UK, and engaging with them around what they need, particularly for refugees who've just arrived, from Afghanistan, for example, where their needs are not being met by government, where they know exactly what's needed in their home countries or in the countries of origin. Engaging directly with them at the local level is vital, because I think that's often overlooked, that people think, for example, people have fled Afghanistan, made it to the UK, problem solved. Well, problem often far from solved. And, these are people who are potentially, feeling very isolated. They're still hooked in very closely to their home communities, and they know what's needed, and they need to be given, support in terms of a voice to ensure that. So anything that local Rotary communities can do, and in doing so, leverage advocacy for increased aid spending. The UK dropped aid spending by 10%. Why? Does that make our world safer? Does that make, the UK richer and a better place? No, I would say that it reduces and diminishes the role of the UK in the world, and that that is something that politicians have direct influence over. Local politicians do. They vote on these things. So giving people a voice and opportunity, engaging with local communities, and focusing on increasing spending and sustainable responses by government are all steps that can be taken.
Thank you, Derren. A slightly different question. Steve Allen from Stamford Burley Rotary asks, what is the most satisfactory aspect of your work? What gives you the most personal satisfaction?
I think the honor, the real honor to meet with people who are overcoming and have overcome adversity of the likes of which I cannot possibly comprehend at a personal level, and learning from the ways in which they have done that, and having that, you know, being able to sit down with people who have gone through, you know, incredibly traumatic experiences, and that's not great that they have, clearly, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but the honor to be able to listen to them, learn from them, and, you know, try to take some of those lessons into the broader world is certainly the most satisfying, you know, enriching aspect of my work. I wish it wasn't, but, you know, the strength of human character that is shown by people who have had, you know, perhaps very few of, you know, I've had an enormously privileged life, and putting that in perspective and understanding is satisfying and humbling and enriching.
Thank you, Derren. Really do appreciate everything that you do, as we do with many of our Rotary Peace Fellows, all of our Rotary Peace Fellows. You know, you talked earlier about investing in education. Well, investing in the education of Rotary Peace Fellows by the Peace Programme is an amazing way of helping thousands and literally millions of other people. Just going back to Afghanistan slightly, Christopher Jenkinson from Colchester is asking, how would we build peace with Afghanistan? And Andrew Collier from Buxton, on recent evidence, are the Taliban all bad?
They're two really good questions, and I wish I had, I mean, if I had an answer to the first question, that would be a heck of a thing in terms of how do we build peace in Afghanistan, because certainly I think clearly the efforts that we collectively, you know, as an international community, as well as the Afghan people and government have tried over the last decade, have not necessarily worked. We have seen, you know, the Taliban have come back and taken control of the country. And so how do we build peace in Afghanistan? I mean, first we'll have to be patient. You know, we have to probably come around to an understanding, which I think that particularly Western countries have been particularly bad at, that peace doesn't necessarily mean Westminster parliamentary democracy. That, you know, there are a range of ways in which, you know, people need to make decisions for themselves about how they wish to be governed, and efforts to impose a particular form of what we see as peace or governance may not necessarily be sustainable. So we need to be patient, we need to engage, and I guess that comes on to the second part of the question, which on recent events of the Taliban all bad. Look, I think no. I mean, everybody thinks they're the hero of their own story. The Taliban don't think that they're all bad. They don't wake up in the morning and think we're about to do terrible things and we're going to enjoy doing it. Are there things that the Taliban do and have done that I personally disagree with, and I think many people in Afghanistan might disagree with? Absolutely, particularly when it comes to the treatment of women and girls and minorities. But first of all, we need to understand what their worldview is. We don't need to accept it, but we need to understand it. We need to engage with it. We need to engage with what shapes that worldview and work out how we can find points of commonality in terms of moving forward on key issues. So that's all very sort of high level. But the short answer, are the Taliban all bad? No, because, you know, they're also individuals and people who wake up and probably want to put bread on the table and for their families and, you know, see some sort of prosperity for their people. But there are clearly points of significant difference. And we need to work out how we can engage with that rather than simply saying, I'm me and you're other, and, you know, you need to come and meet me where I am because I'm not going to where you are. There has to be a way of finding not a compromise in terms of compromising our values, but a compromise in terms of saying, we need to keep people alive. We need to provide them with support and assistance. How do we do that until we can find a middle road? And that's how we build peace: patience and understanding, and, you know, an ability to find compromise and common humanity. And that's really, really difficult, particularly in the current environment.
Thanks, Derren. I think I'll leave the advanced questions there, because I know that there are quite a lot have come in on the Q&A session, which John will lead on. But I just want to say again, thank you very much for everything that you are doing. In relation to the Taliban, we are very fortunate that, you know, the polio program has to continue. And actually it is continuing. There was, with the support of the Taliban, mass immunisations across the whole of Afghanistan happened in November and will be happening again next week to coincide with that in Pakistan. So there are some aspects of it that are positive as we work to a polio-free world. John, over to you.
Thank you, Jannine, and thank you for those questions to date, Derren. Obviously, quite a number of the questions that came in during your talk and during the questions and Q&A covers some of the same topics. So I hope you'll excuse me if I've, some of it a little bit overlaps. But in terms of your comments just now about the Taliban and Afghanistan, a couple of questions, one from Neslihan, one from Eve Conway, are about the situation for specifically women and children in Afghanistan. And a comment from Neslihan that young people and women are vulnerable, but can be a great agency for peace building. What's the best way that we can support them and help with their potential?
I mean, I absolutely agree that, the supporting, young people in general, but particularly young women is not only vital where in that circumstance, but is definitely the way for a sustainable future. The future is female in that regard in terms of sustainable peace. How we can support them, I think that, there are individual programs. I remember seeing a fantastic program that was running Mazar-e Sharif. I don't know if it still is, called Skaterstan, which was a group of skateboarders who built a skateboarding park, particularly focused on bringing in young women as, to be young skateboarders, and simultaneously, providing them with educational opportunities at that facility. In effect, you can come and skate, and if you for every hour of skating, you undertake so many classes or involved in different educational opportunities. So finding those novel ways through things like sport, through things like the arts, to as both a sort of a wedge or an entry point with that particular community, but also with the Taliban or others, that that we have to find those points of saying, how can we engage with these with young women and girls and provide them with educational opportunities. I don't have, I confess, an answer as to what specific programs might be currently available, but I know that colleagues are working on that. But we aren't going to get anywhere by assuming that by accepting the status quo as the Taliban may see it, and not continuing to advocate and engage, and not assuming that that's something that they are, hell-bent on never moving on. The world turns, the Taliban can evolve, and we can support them in maintaining rigorous support for young women and girls.
Thank you, Derren. John East from the Darwin Rotary Club in Lancashire. He and his club have been instrumental in bringing some 15-year-old twins over from Kabul, placing them with foster mum and sisters in the Darwin area. That's depressing news, although with some success at the end of it. We can all do our bit, he says. How can Rotary lobby both national and international governments to change policies to support this activity?
I mean, Rotary has a very large megaphone with a very large constituency globally. And I think, engaging directly, for example, with, senior leadership within the British government, engaging with the United Nations directly, with Martin Griffiths, the head of OCHA, with the head of UNHCR, with the head of these organizations. I think there's a lot of, the OCHA and UNHCR are unlikely to have to change their positions. I think they're very much on the same page as Rotary. But joining those voices, I think, I can't say how that's done beyond those are calls that can most easily be made. But I think activating, for Rotary to be willing to engage in a political space, but realizing that what they're doing is not political and is a necessary, difficult but necessary job. advocating for the rights of refugees and the rights of young women in Afghanistan with the British government is not a political act. That's an act of humanity. But being willing to do that and being willing to convince Rotarians that that's not getting involved in politics is sort of the internal debate that needs to happen. My view would be that that is a call for humanity, that is independent, that is neutral, but you have to engage in the political space. And you know, I know that sometimes that can be difficult for Rotary and Rotarians because there is such a plurality of views, which is a strength of the organisation.
Yes, a challenge we often get, thank you, but you put that well. Little bit of a thought about Afghanistan and the UN's position there. There's a general question about what's the current situation with regard to UN agencies in Afghanistan. Jan Claire's asking that. Do the UN agencies have freedom to carry out their humanitarian projects? And specifically, Kevin Fielding's taken that into the question as to how this affects the current situation for the polio programme.
Look, I can talk about this more generally, only because I don't specifically work on the Afghan file as of today. Myanmar, I can talk about all the live long day, but so look, the needs in Afghanistan have gone through the roof. About 98% of the population, I think, on current estimation, is in need of some form of food assistance. The humanitarian ask for Myanmar, for Afghanistan, I should say, is about $4.4 billion, which is the largest humanitarian ask, certainly currently, and I think historically to date. So that the humanitarian needs there are enormous. And I can say that OCHA and all of our humanitarian partners have stayed and are delivering. Martin Griffiths, the head of OCHA, visited the Taliban very soon after they visited Afghanistan and met with the Taliban, I should say, as well as, you know, many other actors very soon after they took control of the country. Again, that's a very political space to be in. His message was very clear that this is a humanitarian crisis. We need to stay collectively, we need to deliver, and we need to provide for people. So the short answer is yes, humanitarian program is ongoing. Is it challenging? Yes. Is it dangerous at times? Yes. But humanitarian programming is continuing. It's just that the scope of, you know, the scale of needs has increased massively in the last 12 months, and particularly the last 6. And so getting funding from donors, from, you know, donor states is a critical issue, and being able to scale up operations by World Food Programme and others is just a massive logistical challenge, but it is underway.
Thank you. We can't cover the detail of all the questions that come in, so I'll combine a couple from Priscilla Solomon into one if I can, without too much plagiarising or missing out on what she's saying. I do understand from several of the questions there is a lot of will to get engaged in community conversations and setting up peace building on a daily basis across Rotary and elsewhere. How we connect to that is perhaps the challenge, and I think that's summed up by the question she asked right at the end. How can we help you with your work?
Look, it's a great question again. I think that, you know, Rotary and Rotarians continuing to engage first at that local level is really critical, because getting that information and understanding what is happening locally is vital. We are, and I was talking with Jannine a little earlier about this, you know, I'm part of the Rotary Peace Fellow Alumni Association, and we are making a concerted effort as we move forwards to connect the Rotary World Peace Fellows with Rotary and Rotarians much more closely, to ensure that we are a resource for each other, that Rotarians, you know, if they need an expert in a particular area, you know, that there are 1,000+ Peace Fellows out there who can provide, you know, information, expertise, advice on, you know, any number of given fields in peace and conflict and, you know, related technical fields. And we need to make that connection more closely. So it seems counterintuitive, but I think that the way that Rotary can help sort of me, and when I take the question not just about me personally, but about me as the Rotary Peace Fellows more broadly and more globally, how you can help us is reaching out, asking us questions, asking us to get involved, and drawing us into the critical work that you guys are doing. It's very easy for us to get, sometimes very involved in the specific thing we're doing in OCHA or in UNHCR or in particular NGOs or wherever it is we may be working, but drawing us back to the vital community-focused work and global work that Rotary is doing, and not forcing us, but asking the question, saying, we need you here. That helps us in our work. It helps you and it helps us in our work. And the more we can draw that linkage together, the better. And I think we can send out the linkage to the speakers forum, that, there's a list of speakers that, Rotarians can go to draw upon Rotary Peace Fellows to speak at events, either in person or virtually like this. And the Facebook page for the Alumni Association as well. We'll make sure that's distributed. But reach out to us, grab us, put us on the spot, bring us into your world, and let's join that, let's form a bridge between what the Peace Fellows may be doing and what Rotarians are doing, because that is the way that we can really scale up this entire operation.
Thank you. I think that's going to lead nicely into some comments Jannine wants to make in a minute or two. I just want to thank you on behalf of the Rotary Foundation in Great Britain and Ireland and our humanitarian services teams for the talk, but I'm sure Jannine will repeat that in a few minutes. Over to you, Jannine.
Thanks very much, John. I really literally got about a minute to thank you, Derren. Thank you for inspiring us, and thank you to everybody else that's actually here listening and is so engaged with this. What we need you to do is to take action and talk to your fellow Rotarians, to your fellow community. If you're not a Rotarian, let's engage with each other. Let's support each other. Let's use the Rotary Peace Fellow search for potential applicants on an annual basis as a way of talking to our community across a whole diverse aspect of peace building, about development and about community needs. We really have got the tools in our hands if we work together and use them. This is the start of dialogue. Please, please, please stay with us. Join our monthly coffee and chat peace sessions. Engage with the Peace Fellow recruitment process when we send you the information about that next year, and please stay in touch with us. Let's get infected with peace building across Rotary in Great Britain and Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you, Jannine. And just to say, there'll be a recording of this on YouTube in very few days, and that will be on the Rotary and Great Britain and Ireland channel long term. So thank you for that. Thank you to Derren for all he said for us. And I'd just like to finish by reminding you that the next of our talks, which is now going to be after Christmas, we have Richard Joy talking about our supporting the environment area of focus under the title Unsustainability, the Urgent Need to Transform Society. So we look forward to seeing you all again and all your fellow Rotarians and friends on the 13th of January at 5 o'clock. Good evening.